The void itself seemed to hold its breath. Deep space, that endless, cold canvas, stretched out with only the distant dust of a nebula for company. Then, a sensor array, sweeping the blackness, snagged something. A faint, almost lost energy signature. The bridge of the asterisk Cathar, usually a symphony of low hums and purposeful murmurs, fell quiet. Commander Xylos, his multiple ocular stalks swiveling, leaned closer to the main display. What flickered into focus wasn't a rogue asteroid or a transient energy wave. It was a ship. Or what was left of one. Its silhouette was unmistakably human, a species the Coalition had come to know all too well in recent cycles. But this wasn't just damaged. It was utterly obliterated. Twisted, melted hull plating peeled away like burnt skin. Drive nozzles, once capable of interstellar leaps, were fused slag. The debris field around it glittered with the remnants of an unimaginable kinetic impact, perhaps even a localized nova. A human vessel, a tactical officer reported, his voice a low thrumming note of finality. Designation unknown. Status, total loss. No life signs. No power. Structural integrity. Non-existent. Xylos felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. Another one down. Humanity, for all its aggressive expansion and infuriating tenacity, was not invincible. Not against the might of the Coalition. This wreck was testament to that. He was about to order a sweep for recoverable materials, a standard protocol, when another, anomalous reading pulsed from the heart of the wreckage. "Wait," barked Zilar, the asterisk Cathar's lead xenotech, her slender digits dancing across a separate console. Her normally placid vocalizer now held an edge of disbelief. There's a strong signal. A data recorder. Intact." Intact? Xylos angled a stalk at the display, deep within the shattered bridge section, where life support would have ruptured instantly. A small, dark object glowed with a stubbornly stable energy signature. A black box. It shouldn't have survived. Nothing within that catastrophic impact zone should have. "Bring it aboard," Xylos commanded, his satisfaction replaced by a prickle of unease. He knew human technology. He knew their resilience. But this felt different. Hours later, deep in the asterisk Cathar's decoding lab, the air hung heavy with the rhythmic click and whir of alien processors. Zlar stood hunched, her concentration absolute. The black box, an unremarkable rectangular prism, pulsed softly on a data interface. Its robust construction had baffled her engineers, an almost primal resistance to absolute thermal and kinetic forces. "I'm in," Zlar finally announced, her voice flat, almost reverent. The lab went silent. Static hissed for a moment, then cleared. What followed was not the distress call Zlar expected. It wasn't the last screams of a dying crew or the desperate final commands of a captain. No. What echoed through the asterisk Cathar's lab, cold and clear from the shattered remains of a human ship, was laughter. Not screams. Laughter. A sound alien to the Coalition's understanding of defeat. A sharp, almost manic burst, laced with a strange, defiant joy. Zlar flinched back from her console, her sensor fins retracting in shock. Xylos, watching remotely, felt a chill that no vacuum of space could match. "Replay that," he ordered, his voice suddenly rough. The laughter came again. A human, facing certain death, had laughed. Then, a sudden, precise data burst. Coordinates. Detailed, navigational waypoints for a specific sector, far beyond the Coalition's current operational range, yet undeniably familiar. It was a sector they had recently, painfully claimed. A victory they had celebrated. And then, a voice. Calm. Clear. A male human, his tone utterly devoid of fear, laced with an almost casual confidence that bordered on arrogance. One last message, delivered from the maw of destruction, echoing through the empty void. Round 2. The echo of those two words, Round 2, hung heavy in the asterisk Cathar's command center, more jarring than any battle alarm. Commander Xylos felt the chilling sensation again, a mental tremor that rippled through his multi-jointed frame. He'd seen human ships reduced to molecular dust, their crews vaporized in an instant. But never this. Never a final, defiant laugh from the grave. Never an explicit invitation to continue a fight from beyond absolute annihilation. Zealer, still hunched over her console in the decoding lab, shuddered. Her translator unit had processed the human speech perfectly, yet the glam and knives of meaning behind it felt like a cold spike to her core. It challenged every coalition doctrine about warfare, about surrender, about finality. This wasn't a desperate plea, it was a promise, etched into the last moments of existence. "Commander," Zealer's voice crackled over the intercom, a thin thread of unease woven into her tone. Her visual sensors were still locked on the black box, a small, dark testament to something unsettling. "I've finished preliminary analysis of the recording device itself. The black box. Its structural integrity is phenomenal. It's composed of layered, self-reinforcing alloys, some of which our material scientists can't even identify. It was clearly purpose-built to withstand forces far, far beyond standard military specifications. It didn't just to survive the destruction of its vessel, Commander. It mocked it." Xylos narrowed his primary optical stalk, a deep crease forming between his sensor clusters. "Mocked it?" "Elaborate. Yes. Its core components show minimal stress. The data interfaces are pristine. It's as if the catastrophic impact, the localized thermal shock that melted the rest of the ship, the immense kinetic dispersal, they were merely tests. Trials it was designed to pass, designed to asterisk endure." Zalar paused, her vocalizer humming with the weight of the implications. "This isn't merely a data recorder, Commander. It's an unyielding relic. A monument to sheer, stubborn, almost irrational durability." The implication hit Xylos with the force of a plasma torpedo. This small, inert object, salvaged from a cosmic graveyard, wasn't just a device. It embodied the very spirit of the species it represented. To build something so incredibly resilient, not for offense, not for defense, but purely to record and endure the absolute worst, to guarantee that their final message would be heard, that was a terrifying insight into the human psyche. They planned for their own destruction, not with despair, but with a contingency for future defiance. He looked again at the projected coordinates that had followed the laughter. That sector. The victory point, as coalition strategists had grimly dubbed it after the recent, brutal, and very hard-won campaign. A campaign that had cost them dearly in ships and lives. A victory they had celebrated as a decisive blow against human expansion. Now the humans were pointing directly back there, not as a target for revenge, but as the designated arena for a 20 match, a chilling echo of their own recent losses. "The laughter," Xylos murmured, the sound scratchy from his vocalizer, more to himself than to Ziller. "Explain the laughter," from a crew facing vaporization. "It defies all known psychological profiles, Commander," Zealer responded, a tremor in her voice. "Standard sapients facing imminent annihilation exhibit fear, despair, rage, or a primal drive to survive. But not that. Not joy. It implies a complete rejection of their situation, a contempt for their own annihilation, a profound, almost insane challenge to the very concept of defeat. They died not with a whimper but with a grin. The bridge crew remained stiff, their various appendages unmoving, their optical clusters fixed on the main display, where the wrecked human ship still drifted, a silent monument. The realization was sinking in, heavy and cold. The silence on the Asterisk Cathar's command deck was no longer one of contemplation but of dread. Commander Xylos watched the flickering data streams. His primary optical stalk narrowed. The casual confidence of his earlier demeanor entirely evaporated. The decoded black box, that unyielding relic, had become a psychological weapon, its chilling message echoing in the cold vacuum of their tactical analysis lab. "Recalibrate the coordinates," Xylos finally ordered, his voice sharper than usual. "Run a full historical cross-reference. I want every engagement, every skirmish, every strategic maneuver tied to that sector." Now, Zealer, already back at her console, her multi-jointed fingers flying across the holographic interface, complied without a word. Her own sensor fins twitched nervously, a clear sign of profound unease. The raw, defiant laughter, followed by round 2, kept replaying in her mind, a discordant note in the symphony of her logical, structured existence. It simply made no sense. Why laugh? Why challenge? The main display shifted, the detailed star chart scrolling rapidly. Lines of force, vectors of attack, defensive perimeters, all lit up in a complex tapestry of past battles. Each glowing node represented a conflict, a life lost, a strategic objective gained or denied. And then, a cluster of red flared brightly, converging precisely on the coordinates the human black box had delivered. A collective intake of breath rippled through the command center, the sound a low, sibilant hiss from the various alien physiologies. The highlighted sector wasn't just holocation. It was de-nama-location. The victory point, as the Coalition had dubbed it. The site of their most recent, hard-won triumph against humanity. A sector they had bled for, convinced it would shatter human morale and cripple their logistical networks. The Krillak Nebular conflict, a junior tactical officer announced, his vocalizer barely a whisper. Cycle 74. The decisive engagement that routed the primary human fleet from the sector. Coalition losses were significant, but it was a victory. A strategic win. We haven't detected human presence there since. Until now, Xylos rumbled, his voice dark, heavy with the weight of realization. The humans hadn't just died. They hadn't just laughed, they had sent a precise invitation back to the very place where the Coalition had believed it had broken them. It wasn't about vengeance, not in the way the Coalition understood it. It was about a grudge, a refusal to accept the final score. Zalar tapped a final command. A projected timeline materialized, showing the initial human push, their desperate defense, and their eventual brutal retreat from the Krillak Nebula. The Coalition strategists had written it off as a crushing defeat for humanity, a wound they wouldn't recover from for decades. Yet here, from the ashes of a destroyed ship, came the echo of a chilling promise. "They're not retreating," Zalar stated, her voice trembling slightly. "They're reorganizing. This isn't a random location, it's a statement. A declaration. They're telling us exactly where they're coming for us next." To finish what we started, Xylos slammed a multi-jointed fist onto his console, the metal groaning faintly under the impact. The human data stream wasn't a static message. It was a live wire, sparking with defiance even in death. Their laughter wasn't madness, it was a taunt. Their coordinates weren't a plea, they were an address. Humans, Xylos realized with a gut-wrenching certainty, didn't just survive. They remembered. They carried the score. And they never, ever considered the game over. Not until they said it was. The hum of the analysis lab was usually a soothing drone, a familiar backdrop to Zealer's meticulous work. Not tonight. Tonight it felt like the low, persistent growl of an unseen predator. The small, dark black box sat inert, but its message, those final chilling seconds of human data, echoed endlessly in her processors. Laughter. Coordinates. Round 2. She replayed it for the 10th time, then the 20th. Each time, the sound of that human joy, utterly incongruous with the vessel's catastrophic end, sent a fresh ripple of unease through her many sensor fins. Her mental alarms, usually reserved for system failures or unexpected data spikes, were blaring. This wasn't just anomalous, it was fundamentally wrong. Zealer's mind, honed over cycles of xenotech analysis, craved patterns, logical progressions. This message was a blunt instrument, shattering every established pattern of sapient behavior under duress. It defied all reason, all psychology. She pulled up the full, raw audio log, extracting every nuance. Not just the final, defiant message, but the seconds leading up to it. The Cathar sensors had captured the ship's terminal moments. Alarms blaring, hull ruptures reported, life support failing. Panic was there, yes, raw and visceral. Status, critical, a voice had screamed. Containment breach imminent. But then, another calmer voice, undeniably the captain, had cut through the chaos, clear and resonant. "Don't look back. Just laugh, everyone. Let's give them something to remember." And then, That collective, defiant surge of human laughter, quickly followed by the transmission of the coordinates and the final two words. Zealer's many eyes widened slightly, her processors struggling to reconcile the data. This wasn't an accidental outburst of madness. This was controlled, deliberate, a tactical act, executed by a dying crew. They had chosen Point 4 to die this way, to send this message, to transform their own annihilation into a psychological strike against their enemy. The implications gnawed at her, cold and sharp, like microfractures in her analytical framework. The coordinates. The Krylak Nebula. There. Victory point. The coalition had spent cycles celebrating that campaign, analyzing human weaknesses, predicting their long, slow recovery. Every strategic forecast assumed a broken enemy, a species reeling from a devastating loss. But humans, it seemed, didn't process defeat in the same way. They didn't retreat to lick wounds. They seemed to be marking their calendars for the next match. A rematch, in the very arena of their supposed defeat. Commander Xylos. Zahler's voice was a low thrum when she finally contacted him, a stark contrast to her usual confident reports. My analysis of the black box's complete data stream, it's worse than we thought. The laughter wasn't an anomaly. It was a deliberate, coordinated, final gesture of contempt. They encoded those coordinates and that message as a direct challenge, not a desperate cry. They understood their fate and embraced it, using it as a weapon against us. There was silence from Xylos's end for a long moment, a silence that only amplified Zealer's growing dread. They orchestrated their final moments. Xylos finally responded, his own voice hushed, heavy. To send us a message. From the grave. Exactly, Commander, Zealer confirmed, a tremor running through her. They were not just fighting us in that battle. They were already planning the Stamstostuso money, even as their ship disintegrated around them. This black box isn't a record of their defeat. It's a declaration of unending war. It's a statement that, even utterly broken, they refuse to lie down. They refuse to accept Time Game's victory. The chill deepened in the lab. Zoller stared at the dark, inert, black box. It was a monument to human will, an unyielding promise of defiance. A species that stares death in the face, laughs, and sets a date for round 2. They didn't just endure. The command center of the Cathar was no longer just silent. It felt heavy, oppressive, as if the very vacuum outside had seeped into the hull. Commander Xylos stood before the holographic star map, his primary ocular stalks locked onto the glowing red cluster marking the Krylak Nebula. His multi-jointed fists were clenched, the metallic clatter, a harsh counterpoint to the quiet hum of the ship's systems. The black box, that small, dark rectangle, had unleashed a phantom, a ghost of human defiance that now haunted their every strategic thought. Review all defensive postures in the Krylak sector, Xylos commanded, his voice a low growl, devoid of its usual authority. Initiate high alert status for all vessels in adjacent systems. Double patrols. Triple sensor sweeps. A low, worried murmur rippled through the assembled officers. Admiral Thrawn, a massive, 8-limbed strategist from the Coalition High Command, projected his holographic avatar onto the main display. His voice, usually booming, was subdued. Commander, are we certain this isn't merely a psychological ploy? A dying gasp intended to sow paranoia? Paranoia? Xylos retorted, turning to face the shimmering image of the Admiral. His frustration was palpable. They laughed, Admiral. As their ship disintegrated around them, they laughed. They gave us precise coordinates to a sector where we nearly broke ourselves to achieve a victory. We now realize they never conceded. This isn't paranoia. It's a direct declaration. A promise. From the grave itself. Ziller's holographic image appeared beside Thran's, her sensor fins still twitching with unease. The data is undeniable, Admiral. The laughter, the coordinates, the phrase round 2. It was all meticulously recorded, intentionally transmitted. This isn't random. This is a deliberate tactical message, designed to force our hand, to re-engage us on their terms, in an area where they believe they still have something to prove. Thrawn's massive head tilted, his multifaceted eyes glinting. To prove what? They were decimated. Their primary fleet was shattered. To prove, Xylos interjected, that they don't accept defeat. To prove that our victory was, to them, just a temporary setback, a timeout in a game they still intend to win. He swept an arm towards the glowing Kralak Nebula on the map. They expect us to come. They want us to come. It's an invitation to a rematch, thrown down by a crew that died with a grin. The room fell silent once more, the weight of the human challenge pressing down on every coalition officer. The idea of a species embracing their own annihilation to send a taunting message, to set the stage for future conflict, was utterly alien. It was an act of stubborn, almost suicidal defiance that shook the very foundations of their military logic. "We must respond," a tactical analyst finally ventured, his voice a hesitant thrum. To ignore it would be to acknowledge their psychological victory, to admit fear. And to respond, Xylos said, his gaze returning to the Kralak Nebula, is to play their game. To enter their chosen arena. They're dragging us back to the ghost of their defeat, demanding we face it again. The implications were clear, sharp, and terrifying. The black box wasn't just a recording. It was a spectral hand, reaching out from the void, pulling the coalition into a conflict it hadn't prepared for, a conflict dictated by the last, defiant breath of a human crew. A tremor ran through the asterisk huck. Not a structural tremor, but a chill that seeped into the very bones of the ship's command, a silent awakening to a deeper, more profound form of human warfare. They didn't just fight for survival. They fought to leave a legacy of unyielding, eternal defiance. And that, more than any weapon, was truly terrifying. The ghost of humanity had awakened, and it was calling for blood. The war wasn't just fought with plasma cannons and kinetic projectiles. It was fought in the silence of deep space, in the frantic flicker of a display, in the cold logic of processing cores. And now, for Commander Xylos and his coalition forces, it was being fought in the asterisk wires of their own intelligence networks. The black box from the shattered human ship, once a simple forensic tool, had become an insidious digital weapon. Hours bled into cycles in the asterisk Cathars, secure comms array. Technicians, their various optical sensors strained, probed the retrieved data, searching for an error, a hidden virus. Anything that could explain the impossible perfection of the human transmission. The laughter, the precise coordinates, the chilling 2 words. They were all packaged with an almost malicious clarity, completely untainted by the catastrophic forces that had ripped the human vessel apart. Zealer, immersed in a holographic projection of the black box's data stream, felt a cold dread worm its way deeper. Every subroutine, every data packet, was meticulously organized. "It's clean," she reported to Xylos, her vocalizer humming with frustration. "Too clean. There's no residual interference from the explosion, no data corruption. It's as if the transmission was deliberately shielded, its integrity prioritized above all else." Xylos's primary ocular stalk swiveled, focusing on the shimmering schematic. A last-ditch, automated burst, then? Perhaps, Zalar conceded, her sensor fins retracting slightly, a sign of her unease. But the timing, and the content, it suggests a level of premeditation that borders on the fanatical. To program one's final message to be a taunt? To leverage one's absolute destruction into a psychological strike? It's beyond any known tactical doctrine. The silence that followed was broken only by the low thrum of the processors struggling to reconcile this new, terrifying reality. The coalition systems were built on predicting logical, self-preservation responses from enemy combatants. But humanity, it seemed, had rewritten the rules of engagement with their final, defiant breath. "We're finding echoes," a junior comms specialist chimed in, his voice tight. "Residual code signatures. Very faint, embedded in the background noise of the black box data. It's a secondary layer, a persistent digital imprint." Zealer immediately pulled up the specialist's findings. On the holographic display, a faint, shimmering web of complex low-frequency data materialized. It wasn't a virus, not an active attack, but something far more unsettling. A ghost in the machine. A digital shadow. "This isn't just a transmission," Zealer whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's a time marker, a digital breadcrumb." This black box was designed not just to send a message, but to leave an indelible trace. It's an informational beacon. It tells us not just what they said, but asterisk that they said it at all, and that they expect us to find it. Xylos felt a chill deeper than the void. The humans hadn't just died. They had crafted their death into a signal that continued to resonate, a low, persistent hum in the Coalition's most secure networks. They were fighting a war of information, a war of attrition, even an absolute defeat. Their resilience wasn't just physical, it was digital. This wasn't about a single ship anymore. It was about a species that refused to be erased. A species that, even in dying, managed to hack into the enemy's perception, polluting their systems with doubt and dread. They had turned their own demise into a lasting, unyielding echo in the wires. The true terror wasn't just their promise of a round two, but the knowledge that their defiance would linger, an eternal, unsettling hum, long after the physical battle was done. Humans don't just leave wreckage. They leave a mark. The whispers started in the farthest outposts, carried on encrypted frequencies no longer feeling quite so secure. A low hum of unease, growing louder with every data burst. The black box, salvaged from the shattered human ship, was no longer a secret confined to the asterisk Cathar. Its message, raw and undiluted, had been disseminated across the Coalition's highest command echelons. And with every replay, with every processing of that chilling laughter and defiant promise, the vast alien empire felt a seismic shift in its understanding of humanity. Fleet Admiral Varkos, stationed light years away in the gleaming heart of Coalition space, listened to the recording for the first time. His multiple ear-like membranes flattened against his skull, a universal sign of profound discomfort. He stood in his cavernous command chamber, surrounded by holographic displays mapping millions of star systems. Yet, all his attention was focused on the single, ethereal voice echoing from the data slate in his hand. The laughter, unexpected and unsettling, made his internal organs twitch. Round 2. "Impossible," Varkos rumbled, his voice a low, guttural vibration that usually quelled dissent. Now it was tinged with an unfamiliar tremor. Their intelligence reports indicated total morale collapse in that sector. Their fleet was decimated. This is not the sound of a broken species. His chief strategist Kelnar, a smaller, more cerebral being, adjusted his optical lenses. "Commander Xylos's initial report was precise, Admiral. The vessel was unequivocally destroyed. There were no survivors. The black box itself is a testament to human engineering resilience, designed specifically to endure such a cataclysm and transmit this particular message." Varkos replayed the final seconds again. The laughter, that defiant, almost joyful sound, the clear, calm voice. Round 2. It wasn't a desperate last stand. It was a gauntlet thrown, a direct, unequivocal challenge hurled from the void itself. This wasn't a military intelligence report. It was a psychological weapon. Across the Coalition, in countless command centers and strategic planning rooms, the scene repeated itself. Seasoned officers, hardened by cycles of interspecies conflict, found themselves unsettled. The logic of war, as they understood it, was about overwhelming force, about breaking the enemy's will. But humans, it seemed, had no such will to break. Or rather, their will simply bent, fractured, and then snapped back with terrifying, grinning force. Captain Lyra, commander of a patrol cruiser in a distant, quiet sector, heard the transmission and felt a cold prickle crawl across her chitinous plating. Her vessel had never directly engaged humans. They were an abstract threat, a problematic species on the fringes. But that voice, that laughter, made them terrifyingly real. A ghost reaching across the void, planting a seed of dread. "They're not just fighting our ships," Lyra murmured to her comms officer. "They're fighting our minds. They're turning their own annihilation into a statement. A promise." The black box was no longer just a piece of technology. It was a conduit, channeling the raw, untamed spirit of humanity across unimaginable distances. It was a voice from beyond death, echoing through the silent, cold expanse of space. And that voice carried a truth far more disturbing than any military defeat. Humans didn't just fight to survive, they fought to persist, even as ghosts. And that persistent voice, laughing from the abyss, was a weapon that no coalition defense could hope to counter. It was the sound of a species that simply refused to die quietly or politely. And that, in itself, changed everything. The true war wasn't fought with plasma lances or kinetic slugs, at least not at first. No, the real conflict began in the digital arteries of the coalition, in the secure, supposedly impenetrable networks that stitched their vast empire together. The black box's message, initially a contained secret aboard the asterisk Cathar, had become something else entirely. A digital contagion. It started subtly. A fractional increase in data traffic here, an anomalous ping on a remote server there. Then, a low-priority command from a mid-level officer for a re-evaluation of Krillak Nebula defense protocols. Soon after, a sudden, urgent request from Fleet Admiral Varkos himself for all available strategic analysis on human psychological warfare. The whispers in the comms channels grew louder, turning into frantic queries, then panicked reports. Zealer, back on the asterisk Cathar, watched her own monitoring systems with growing horror. The faint, persistent, digital imprint she had discovered on the black box wasn't merely a marker, it was a catalyst. The act of decoding the box, of pulling its raw data into coalition networks, had released something far more insidious than a virus. It had released an idea. Commander Zealer reported to Xylos, her voice tight, the black box's data it's propagating. Not as a malicious program, not a standard exploit. It's the raw recording itself, copied, mirrored, downloaded, then re-uploaded across every accessible coalition strategic node. It's like a neural parasite. It's infecting the very thinking of our command structure. Xylos watched the flickering nodes on his strategic map, each one representing a coalition vessel or outpost, now highlighted with a subtle, ominous glow. Explain, Zealer. The message, sir? The laughter. The coordinates. Round 2. It's generating an unprecedented demand for reanalysis, for strategic reevaluation across all sectors. Every officer, every strategist, every data analyst who hears it is compelled to understand it, to process it. And in doing so, they pull more data, they access more files, they replicate the recording. It's self-propagating by psychological design. It's a viral swarm of information, weaponized defiance. A comms officer, his facial tendrils twitching with alarm, cried out, "Unusual activity detected in the supply chain logistics. Orders for defensive upgrades in Krodak are overriding existing priorities. Multiple fleets are being diverted, unprompted by high command, but rather by localized strategic concerns responding to the black box data." Xylos slammed his fist on a console. This wasn't a computer virus. This was far worse. Humans had weaponized fear, then packaged it as an inescapable, undeniable truth. They had died, but their last act had infected the entire coalition war machine with doubt, with dread, with an obsessive focus on their defiant challenge. The victory point was no longer a symbol of coalition triumph. It was a festering wound, picked open by the ghosts of a laughing crew. The coalition wasn't just reacting to a threat. It was responding to a dare. A dare whispered from the grave, amplified into a roar by a network of terrified minds. The humans, even in destruction, weren't just promising a fight. They were forcing the enemy to prepare for it, to exhaust themselves, to unravel their own carefully constructed strategies, all by just saying, "Round 2." They didn't just break the coalition's ships. They broke their peace of mind, one chilling laugh at a time. The grinding shriek of stressed metal on metal echoed through the cavernous dry dock, a symphony of industrial defiance. Sparks rained down like incandescent rain, splashing across the grimy plating of a ship that was less built, more assembled. This wasn't the sleek, pristine vessel of coalition propaganda. This was a brutalist sculpture of survival, patched with scavenged alloys, bristling with jury-rigged weaponry. Deep within the hidden, asteroid-laced fringes of the Krillak Nebula, humanity was preparing for Round 2. Captain Eva Rostova, her face smudged with grease and exhaustion, ran a hand along a newly welded seam. The metal was still hot to the touch, vibrating with the raw energy being poured into it. Her eyes, sharp and weary, scanned the chaos around her. Hundreds of human engineers, pilots, and mechanics swarmed, a hive of frenetic, desperate activity. The air, thick with the smell of ozone, burnt wiring, and human sweat, hummed with a fierce, quiet determination. "Status on Asterix, the scrapper ensign?" Rostova barked, her voice cutting through the din. A young, gaunt engineer, barely out of basic, wiped sweat from his brow with a greasy rag. "Life support holding, Captain," he replied, his voice strained. "The tertiary power conduits are rerouted. Still jury-rigging the main shield generator, pulled from a decommissioned freighter. It'll hold, mostly. Might flicker under sustained fire." Rostova simply nodded. Mostly was good enough. Might flicker was a risk they'd take. They had no other choice. After the Coalition's supposed victory here in Krelak, after their fleet had been scattered and decimated, there were no pristine ships left. Only these patchwork monstrosities, born of desperation and a refusal to die. They were, quite literally, the junkyard fleet. Across the dry dock, a pilot, Lieutenant Jax, was strapping into the cockpit of his fighter. It looked like a broken-winged bird, patched with mismatched plating, its thrusters salvaged from 3 different models. He caught Rostova's eye, a grim smile on his lips. "Heard the Coalition picked up one of our black boxes, Captain," Jax yelled over the clamor, his voice full of dark humor. "Heard they got quite the message. Hope they enjoyed the laugh." Rostova's own lips twitched. The memory of her last command, the PACU vigilant disintegrating around her, was still fresh. But the memory of the captain's booming laugh, echoed by the crew as the final message went out, that fueled them. That was the ghost in their machines. "They heard it, Lieutenant," Rostova replied, her voice low, almost a growl. "And now they'll feel it. Finish calibrations. We move in 3 cycles." The comms officer, huddled over a flickering console, pulled up the familiar coordinates. The Krelak Nebula, the site of their crushing defeat. But humans didn't see it as a defeat. They saw it as the end of Round 1. And they had sent an invitation for Round 2. An invitation they were now preparing to deliver in person, aboard vessels that should never have flown, built by hands that refused to give up. A massive, multi-jointed crane slowly maneuvered a salvaged plasma cannon, its dull gray barrel marred with scorch marks, into place on Asterix, the Scrappers 4. The engineers strained, guiding it into its mount, their muscles bulging. Every bolt, every wire, every piece of plating on this makeshift fleet was a testament to impossible grit, to a stubborn, bloody-minded refusal to break. This wasn't about superior firepower. This was about making something from nothing. This was about telling the galaxy that humanity, even when shattered, would find a way to stand back up. And then, with a laugh, they'd hit back. Harder. Humans don't just pick up the pieces. They forge them into weapons. The Krelak Nebula was a graveyard. Millennia of stellar dust, gas clouds, and shattered asteroid fields made it a treacherous maze. A cosmic maelstrom where even advanced navigation systems faltered. For the Coalition, it was a battleground they had painstakingly cleared, an ugly scar of victory. For humanity, huddled deep within its chaotic embrace, it was home. And it was their weapon. Captain Eva Rostova watched a team of engineers, moving with practiced, brutal efficiency, rip a power conduit from the lifeless shell of a derelict Coalition cruiser. The sparks sprayed, brilliant and fleeting, in the murky light filtering through the nebula's dense clouds. This wasn't surgical scavenging. It was tactical butchery, extracting resources from their fallen enemies to breathe life into their own skeletal fleet. Every salvaged component, every piece of twisted metal, was a testament to a savage, relentless logic. "They think we're running, Commander," Rostova murmured, her voice a low rumble to Lieutenant Jax, who stood beside her, his gaunt face etched with the same grim determination. "They think we're licking our wounds, rebuilding in some forgotten corner of the galaxy." Jax grunted, his eyes tracking a repurposed Coalition thruster being fitted onto a human transport ship, now bristling with salvaged coil guns. "They think we're playing by their rules." That's their mistake. The Coalition's understanding of warfare was based on overwhelming force, strategic choke points, and a clean, efficient application of power. They built majestic vessels, pristine and powerful. Humans, here in the Krelak, built monsters from scrap. There, ships were cobbled-together nightmares, their weapon systems jury-rigged, their shields patched and prone to flickering. But every imperfection was a challenge overcome, every new piece of tech a testament to desperate, brilliant improvisation. "Their arrogance is our shield," Rostova continued, a flicker of something almost predatory in her eyes. "They send a scout probe into this mess. They expect to find a handful of desperate survivors, hiding, praying. They won't find pristine, shining vessels. They'll find this." She gestured around the vast, clandestine dry dock carved into a massive asteroid, where dozens of vessels, each a testament to desperate ingenuity, silently awaited their moment. "They'll find a junkyard. And they'll underestimate a junkyard every single time." A welder's torch flared, bathing a section of hull in harsh light, revealing the patchwork of alien alloys and human composites. The stench of burnt metal and stale recycled air filled the cavern. This wasn't just about survival. It was about twisting the knife. It was about taking the very tools of their defeat and turning them into instruments of vengeance. "The logic, Commander," Jack said, his voice hard, "is that they'll never expect us to fight Sant here. Not after what happened. Not with what we have left." Rostova nodded slowly. "Exactly. They'll expect a conventional fleet. A standard engagement will give them a swarm of ghosts, built from their own wreckage, striking from the heart of their supposed victory." The laughter from the black box wasn't just a taunt. It was a promise of a deeply unconventional fight. A brutal, improvised dance of death in a place no sane fleet would enter willingly. This was humanity's terrible beauty. When stripped of everything, when reduced to the absolute brink, they didn't just find a way to survive. They found a way to become something scany more, something feral, something utterly unpredictable. They didn't just endure the impossible, they weaponized it. They turned their savagery into an art. They knew how to break. But more importantly, they knew how to break back. The patrol cruiser Vindex, a sleek spearhead of coalition might, cut through the swirling gas and dust of the Krolak Nebula. Its sensors, usually so precise, struggled against the stellar interference, painting a blurry, shifting picture of cosmic chaos. Lieutenant Commander Var, his optical clusters narrowed, scanned the main display. This sector, so recently a coalition triumph, now felt like a suffocating shroud. The human black box had seeded unease throughout the fleet, and Var could feel it in the taut silence of his bridge. "Anything, sensors?" Var's voice was a low thrum. "Still nothing, Commander," replied a technician, her vocalizer tinged with frustration. "Standard background radiation, gravitational anomalies consistent with the nebula's density. No signatures consistent with active human vessels. They're either very good at hiding, or they simply aren't here." The technician's underlying implication was clear. The black box message was a psychological trick. But Var couldn't shake the sound of that laughter. Or the cold, casual challenge. Round 2. Humans didn't play games without stakes. Suddenly, a sharpish shupping sliced through the quiet. "Contact. Multiple unknown signatures. Bearing everywhere. They're appearing out of the dust clouds." The technician's voice rose in a panicked shriek. Before Var could respond, the Vindex shuddered violently, not from a human weapon. No. The sound that ripped through the void, that hammered against the Asterix Vindex's shields, was utterly, horribly familiar. It was the distinct crackle and boom of a coalition plasma cannon, charging and firing. What in the void was that? Var roared, bracing against a second, even heavier impact. The bridge lights flickered, alarm klaxons blared. "Commander!" the tactical officer screamed. "Incoming fire from multiple vectors." And the weapon signatures. They're ours. Coalition spec plasma and kinetic munitions, but they're not from our forces. On the main display, phantom images solidified. Not the sleek, recognizable shapes of human cruisers, but jagged, twisted silhouettes. Ships cobbled together from scrap, bristling with mismatched weaponry. And from their crude hulls, searing bolts of coalition green plasma lanced out, ripping into the Asterisk Vindex's shields. Var stared, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't just a counterattack. This was a perversion. The humans, decimated and supposedly in retreat, had not only salvaged enough material to build a fleet, but they had repurposed coalition weapons, turned them against their former owners. The very victory, the coalition had celebrated here had been stripped for parts, its thunder stolen. "They're using our own guns," a stunned pilot cried out, dodging a volley of familiar-looking projectiles. "They've armed themselves with our wreckage." The Vindex took another hit, its primary shield generator groaning under the strain. Explosions bloomed in the inky blackness, revealing fleeting glimpses of the human vessels, each one a testament to desperate, brutal ingenuity. They weren't elegant, they were savage, they were functional, and they were coming. Var's mind reeled. The laughter. The coordinates. Round 2. It wasn't a bluff, it was a promise, and the humans were delivering it with the terrifying sound of the Coalition's own stolen thunder. This wasn't a fair fight. This was a brutal, defiant mockery. Humans don't just pick up pieces. They pick up yours and they shoot you with them. The Vindex screamed, not with the calculated alarm of a tactical warning, but with the raw, metallic shriek of a ship being torn apart. Lieutenant Commander Var was thrown against his command console, his multifaceted eyes wide with a terror that transcended tactical logic. The bridge lights pulsed violently, painting the faces of his crew in flickering shades of crimson as klaxons blared a deafening symphony of destruction. "Shields failing." A technician wailed, his vocalizer barely audible over the din. Repeated impacts. Primary energy conduits rupturing. Another explosion rocked the cruiser, sending sparks showering from exposed wiring. The distinct, familiar flash of a Coalition plasma bolt ripped past the viewscreen, illuminating the swirling nebula in an eerie green glow. But it wasn't an Allied ship firing. No. From the churning dust clouds, grotesque, patched-together shapes were emerging, their hulls a brutal collage of scavenged plating. And from their crude weapon ports, Coalition-standard plasma bolts, kinetic slugs, and disruptor pulses hammered against the Asterix Vindex's dying shields. "It's impossible." Var roared, trying to steady himself, his mind reeling. "They shouldn't have these weapons. Our salvage teams cleared this sector after Krillak. Every usable component was either destroyed or retrieved." "Commander, no!" the tactical officer screamed back, his voice thick with disbelief. "Their energy signatures are composite. They've integrated our own armaments onto their craft. Those are our heavy disruptor cannons on their lead cruiser. Our railguns are impacting our aft section." The realization slammed into Var with greater force than any plasma shot. The humans hadn't just survived their supposed annihilation here in Krillak. They hadn't just rebuilt a fleet from scrap, they had picked clean the bones of the Coalition's victory. They had cannibalized their former destroyers, taken the very weapons that had torn their original fleet apart, and turned them against their rightful owners. This wasn't just a battle, it was a profound, horrifying act of reclamation. On the main display, a flickering external camera feed showed one of the human vessels. It was an abomination, a central human hull, elongated and rough, with a massive, unmistakable Coalition plasma lance bolted crudely to its fore. The lance, once mounted on a sleek Coalition cruiser, now looked like a grotesque appendage, firing with a familiar, devastating roar. "They didn't just rebuild," a stunned navigator whispered, staring at the screen. They inherited our technology. They became us in a way." Var felt a cold dread seep into his very core. The laughter from the black box. The way. Round 2. It wasn't a promise of mere vengeance. It was a declaration of a grotesque inheritance. Humanity, left for dead, had not only risen, but had done so by wearing the very skin of their former conquerors. They were a shadow fleet, built from the remnants of Coalition triumph. An enduring echo of alien power turned against itself. The Vindex groaned, its structural integrity failing. Alarms flatlined. The sounds of their own weapons, stolen and turned against them, filled the void. Humans didn't just fight for survival. They fought to assimilate, to adapt, to become the very thing that broke them. They were inheritors of chaos, and their savagery knew no bounds. They had learned from their defeat, and they had turned it into a weapon. They didn't just survive. They turned a turn.